She didn't stab them. She didn't shoot them. She smiled at the dinner table and waited. In 17th century Paris, one woman poisoned her own father, her own brothers, not out of rage, but patience. And for years, everyone believed she was innocent. This is the true story of Madame de Brinvilliers, a loving daughter, a respected aristocrat, and one of history's most dangerous killers. Paris, in the middle of the 17th century, was a city that perfected the art of pretending by day. It dazzled. Stone palaces rose along narrow streets like monuments to order and reason. Church bells rang with mathematical precision, marking time for a society that believed itself civilized, enlightened, and chosen by God. Carriages rattled over cobblestones, carrying silk-draped nobles who spoke of virtue, lineage, and honor as if these things were inherited the way land and titles were. But Paris revealed its true nature only if you looked closely, if you listened between the sounds. Behind shuttered windows, secrets fermented, debts, affairs, grudges, and ambitions thickened the air like unseen smoke. In drawing rooms scented with perfume and wax, alliances were forged not with loyalty, but with calculation. Reputation mattered more than truth. Appearances outweighed morality, and death, when it came quietly enough, was often welcomed as convenience rather than tragedy. This was a city where people vanished without screams. In the 17th century, murder did not always wear the face of violence. There were no flashing blades, no public bloodshed in polite society. The most dangerous deaths arrived politely, served warm, dissolved into wine, or sprinkled invisibly into soup. A cough, a fever, a slow weakening of the body. By the time suspicion formed, it was already too late, and often. No one wished to look too closely anyway. Doctors spoke of humors, priests spoke of God's will, families spoke of unfortunate illness, and Paris moved on. It was into this city, so brilliant on the surface, so rotten beneath, that Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray was born. She entered the world on July 22, 1630, into privilege so complete it seemed unshakable. Her family name carried weight. Her father, Antoine Dreux d'Aubray, was not merely wealthy, he was powerful, a high-ranking official of the French state, master of requests, and counselor to the crown. He occupied a position that controlled access to justice, favors, and the royal ear itself in Paris. That kind of power was more valuable than gold. The d'Aubray household was one of order and expectation. Servants moved quietly. Meals were formal, measured affairs. Children were raised not to express themselves, but to represent something larger. The honor of the family, the continuity of a name, the illusion of perfection. Love, if it existed, was disciplined, affection was restrained, obedience was assumed. Marie-Madeleine was the eldest child, and she was a daughter. In a world governed by inheritance laws and male privilege, this single fact shaped the rest of her life before she ever understood it. She would be educated, polished, and displayed, but she would not inherit what truly mattered. The vast estate her father controlled would pass, almost entirely, to her younger brothers, from an early age. Marie-Madeleine learned what Paris expected of women like her. She learned how to speak softly and smile convincingly, how to lower her eyes at the correct moment, how to conceal displeasure behind grace. She learned that obedience was rewarded with comfort and resistance punished with silence. She also learned something more dangerous, that power did not always announce itself. Power, in Paris, often hid behind charm. Antoine Dreux d'Aubray was widely respected, even feared in certain circles. He was a man accustomed to command, to having doors open when he approached, to seeing laws bend subtly in his favor. At home, his authority was absolute. His children were not encouraged to question him, especially not his daughter, to the outside world. He was a model patriarch, wealthy, disciplined, loyal to crown and church. To Marie-Madeleine, he was an immovable force, a man who controlled not only her present, but the shape of her future. Marriage would be her destiny. Not love, not choice, but arrangement. A suitable alliance. Approved by her father. Negotiated like a contract. Her value lay in what she could secure for the family, not in what she desired. Paris applauded such arrangements. It called them stability. Yet beneath the polished floors and embroidered curtains of the d'Aubray home, tension quietly accumulated. Marie-Madeleine was intelligent, sharper than many realized. She observed more than she spoke. She noticed how power flowed through rooms, how fear silenced servants, how money erased mistakes. She noticed, too, how easily people believed what they wanted to believe. Illness, in particular, fascinated her, not as a child's fear, but as an adult curiosity. How quickly strength vanished, how symptoms confused even experienced physicians, how death, when gradual, provoked far less alarm than sudden violence at the time. These were only thoughts, idle observations, nothing more. No one, least of all Antoine Dreux d'Aubray, suspected that his eldest daughter was learning lessons Paris itself had been teaching for centuries. That silence protects the powerful, that appearances are armor, and that the most effective crimes are the ones no one wants to name in this city. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray was not an anomaly. She was a product, and Paris had already shown her how to kill without ever lifting a blade. From the outside, Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray appeared to be everything Paris admired in a young noblewoman. She was well educated, fluent in the language of courtly manners, trained in music, religion, and the subtle art of pleasing without ever seeming eager. Her beauty was understated rather than dazzling, dark eyes that lingered a second too long, a composed expression that revealed little. She did not demand attention. She attracted it quietly, in a society obsessed with surfaces. This made her dangerous long before anyone realized it. Inside the d'Aubray household, Marie-Madeleine's days were governed by routine and restraint. Every hour served a purpose. Every lesson prepared her for one inevitable future: marriage. She was not raised to rule, inherit, or decide. She was raised to be exchanged. Antoine Dreux d'Aubray understood this world perfectly. He had risen within it by mastering its rules. As a senior official of the crown, he knew that appearances mattered more than sentiment. That order was maintained not through affection, but authority. His children were extensions of his name, not individuals with desires of their own. Marie-Madeleine, as his eldest, felt this pressure most acutely. She watched her younger brothers with a mixture of affection and quiet resentment. They were allowed freedoms she was denied. Their mistakes were forgiven as youthful excess. Their futures were spoken of with certainty: careers, titles, property, while hers was discussed only in terms of suitability. She did not hate them, but she understood what they represented. Inheritance law was mercilessly clear. No matter her intelligence, no matter her obedience, no matter her loyalty, she would never control the wealth her father commanded, at best. She would receive a dowry, generous. Yes, but ultimately a consolation prize. Her brothers would receive power. She would receive permission. And Marie Madeleine learned early that permission was another word for dependence. Yet she did not rebel openly. That would have been foolish. Paris punished women who challenged their roles. Instead, she practiced patience. She listened. She observed. She stored grievances carefully, like valuables locked away for future use. Her relationship with her father was formal, distant, and unyielding. Antoine d'Aubray was not cruel in the obvious sense. He did not beat his children or starve them of comfort. But affection was rare, approval conditional, and disappointment swift. His expectations were absolute, and he did not tolerate deviation. To him, Marie Madeleine was an investment, and investments, he believed, existed to be managed. As she grew older, subtle cracks began to form beneath her composure. She saw how men like her father navigated the world with ease, protected by law, custom, and reputation. She saw how women were blamed for the consequences of choices they were never allowed to make, and she saw how easily moral language was used to justify control. Virtue, she learned, was a performance. At social gatherings, Marie Madeleine smiled and listened as guests spoke of honor, loyalty, and Christian duty. She watched how the same men who praised morality also whispered about affairs, bribes, and quiet scandals. Hypocrisy did not disgust her. It educated her. She began to understand Paris as a game, one played with rules that could be bent, avoided, or ignored entirely, provided one did not embarrass the wrong people. And Antoine d'Aubray, despite his authority, was not immune to this system. His power depended on discretion. His reputation depended on silence. Anything that threatened public scandal was a liability he could not afford. This fact would matter later. For now, Marie Madeleine waited. Her marriage was arranged when she was still young. Negotiated like a treaty, Antoine Gobelin, Baron de Noailles, came from wealth and respectable lineage. Shortly after the wedding, he would be elevated to Marquis de Brinvilliers, a title that reflected ambition rather than achievement. On paper, the match was ideal. In reality, it was a slow disaster. But before that future revealed itself, before debt, desire, and betrayal reshaped her life, Marie Madeleine entered marriage believing one dangerous thing: that obedience would be rewarded, that patience would protect her, that if she followed the rules long enough, the system that constrained her might eventually loosen its grip. Paris, of course, had never rewarded patience. It rewarded those who learned how to exploit its blind spots. And Marie Madeleine d'Aubray was beginning to understand where those blind spots lay. She did not yet imagine murder. She did not yet imagine poison. But she had already learned the most important lesson of all. Power did not belong to the loud or the righteous. It belonged to those who knew how to wait and how to act when no one was watching. The marriage of Marie Madeleine d'Aubray was announced as a triumph. Paris approved of it immediately. Antoine Gobelin, Baron de Noailles, came from a family whose wealth had been woven, quite literally, into the fabric of France. The Gobelins had made their fortune through tapestry workshops that supplied royalty and nobility alike. Their name carried prestige, craftsmanship, and long-standing respectability. When Antoine Gobelin was elevated to Marquis de Brinvilliers shortly after the wedding, the match appeared even more perfect. A powerful bride, a wealthy groom, two names joined to reinforce status, fortune, and influence. From the outside, it was exactly what society demanded. From the inside, it began to decay almost immediately. Antoine Gobelin was charming in public and careless in private. He enjoyed the privileges of nobility, but lacked the discipline required to preserve them. Where Marie Madeleine was controlled and observant. Her husband was impulsive, restless, and endlessly confident in his ability to escape consequences. He gambled, at first, discreetly, then obsessively. Card tables, dice games, private wagers, each promised quick wealth, excitement, and validation. Losses were explained away as temporary misfortune. Wins, when they came, were celebrated loudly and spent even faster. Marie Madeleine watched as money drained from their household with frightening speed. Her dowry, 200,000 livres, a staggering sum, was absorbed into Antoine's habits as if it were nothing. Within a few years, not only his inheritance but her contribution to the marriage was gone. Debt replaced comfort. Anxiety replaced stability. And Antoine behaved as though none of it mattered. Their marriage, like many among the aristocracy, operated on an unspoken agreement, discretion over fidelity. Affairs were tolerated, provided they remained quiet and did not threaten appearances. Marie Madeleine accepted this arrangement with outward calm. Paris had taught her that marriage was not about love, it was about survival. Yet what she did not expect was how easily her husband would expose her to humiliation. Antoine Gobelin did not merely take lovers. He flaunted his recklessness. He spoke too freely. He invited dangerous people into their orbit, and most unforgivably. He introduced Marie Madeleine to a man who would change the trajectory of her life entirely. Gaudin de Sainte-Croix. Sainte-Croix was an officer, educated, confident, and acutely aware of his own intelligence. He possessed the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, a trait Marie Madeleine recognized immediately. Where her husband was careless, Sainte-Croix was precise. Where Antoine wasted, Sainte-Croix calculated. Their attraction was swift and unmistakable. What began as flirtation hardened into dependency. Sainte-Croix did not merely desire Marie Madeleine, he understood her. He listened. He affirmed her frustrations. He validated the anger she had learned to suppress since childhood, for the first time in her life. She felt seen not as an asset, but as a person. The affair lasted years. Paris whispered, as it always did. But nothing reached scandal. Discretion was maintained, appearances preserved. Even the children, 7 in total, did little to anchor the marriage. Rumors circulated that several of them were not Antoine's. No one pursued the truth too aggressively. Until Antoine Dreux d'Aubray intervened. Marie Madeleine's father had tolerated much. But this crossed a line he could not ignore. An affair was one thing, an affair that threatened the family's reputation, especially with a man who lacked proper discretion, was another. Antoine d'Aubray did not confront his daughter directly. He did something far more effective. Using his influence, he obtained a lettre de cachet, a royal order issued in the king's name, on vague, questionable charges. Sainte-Croix was arrested and sent to the Bastille. No trial, no defense, no explanation. Just disappearance, for Marie Madeleine. This was not merely punishment, it was a declaration of control. Her father had reached into her life and erased the one relationship that had ever offered her agency. She did not scream, she did not protest publicly. She learned something instead. That power could destroy lives silently, that law could be weaponized, and that love, when it threatened authority, was treated as a crime, as Sainte-Croix sat behind stone walls. Marie Madeleine's world narrowed, her husband's debts deepened, her father's authority loomed larger than ever, and something inside her shifted, slowly, irrevocably. Resentment hardened into resolve. She did not yet know how she would respond, but she understood now that obedience had failed her, that patience had cost her everything she valued, and that if she ever wanted control over her own fate, she would have to take it quietly, carefully, and without asking permission. Paris had taught her that lesson well. The Bastille was not merely a prison, it was a message. Its stone walls rose over Paris like a reminder that the king's authority did not need justification. Men were sent there not always for crimes, but for inconvenience, a signature, a seal, a quiet order, and a life could be erased from public view without explanation. Gaudin de Sainte-Croix disappeared behind those walls in the mid-1660s, condemned not by evidence, but by influence. Marie-Madeleine learned of his arrest after the fact. No warning, no chance to intervene. One day, he simply did not come. The next. Whispers reached her, careful, fearful whispers, that he had been taken in the night, that her father's hand was behind it, that the matter was settled and not to be discussed. In Paris, silence often carried more weight than truth. She went to Antoine Dreux d'Aubray, hoping, perhaps foolishly, for explanation, even mercy. What she received instead was certainty. Her father did not deny his actions. He did not apologize. He did not soften the blow with sympathy. He reminded her of her duty, of reputation, of family honor, of obedience. Sainte-Croix, he said, was a liability, a man of questionable character, a threat to everything the d'Aubray name represented. Removing him was not cruelty, it was necessity. Marie-Madeleine listened without interruption. Outwardly, she appeared composed, respectful, the obedient daughter he expected. Inwardly, something fractured, not explosively, but with the slow, grinding certainty of stone giving way under pressure. She understood then that her father would never see her as anything other than property, that her desires were irrelevant, that affection, in his world, was conditional and easily withdrawn. If she had hated him in that moment, it would have been simple. Hatred burns fast and bright, but what she felt instead was colder, more enduring. She felt humiliated, her lover imprisoned, her marriage collapsing under debt and neglect, her autonomy erased by a man who claimed it was for her own good. Every path available to her led back to dependence on her husband, on her father, on a system that offered her no escape. She returned to her household and resumed her role. Paris saw nothing unusual. That was the most dangerous part. While Sainte-Croix endured confinement in the Bastille, Marie-Madeleine endured something else entirely: invisibility. No one suspected the transformation taking place behind her calm exterior. No one noticed how her patience changed shape, how silence became calculation. Letters reached her occasionally, smuggled through intermediaries. Sainte-Croix wrote of the prison, of the men he met there, of conversations conducted in whispers and shadows. The Bastille was filled not only with political prisoners, but with alchemists, apothecaries, and men accused of obscure, unsettling crimes. Poisoning was one of them. In 17th century France, poison was feared above all other methods of murder. It was intimate, cowardly, some said untraceable, a crime that mocked both medicine and justice. Those accused of it were treated with particular horror. And yet, within the Bastille, knowledge flowed freely. Sainte Croix learned of substances that left no obvious marks, of powders that mimicked illness, of doses that could weaken, confuse, and kill slowly enough to avoid suspicion. He learned which poisons lingered and which vanished, which created pain and which created plausible deniability. Marie-Madeleine read his words carefully. At first, curiosity masqueraded as concern. She told herself she was only trying to understand what he endured, what dangers surrounded him. But the knowledge settled in her mind differently. It did not frighten her. It intrigued her. Meanwhile, her circumstances worsened. Antoine Gobelin's gambling grew reckless. Creditors pressed harder. The household's finances frayed. Marie-Madeleine was forced to negotiate, to placate, to borrow. Her husband's irresponsibility became her burden. His failures, her humiliation, and always, looming above it all, was her father, wealthy, secure, untouched by consequence. The contrast became unbearable. Antoine Dreux-Dobray enjoyed comfort while she endured chaos. He controlled wealth she could never access. He wielded power without accountability, and he had proven, decisively, that he would use that power against her without hesitation. By the time Sainte Croix was released from the Bastille, Marie-Madeleine was no longer the woman he had known. She greeted him not with tears, but with resolve. What had begun as an affair had become something else entirely. A partnership forged in resentment and sharpened by knowledge, together. They shared a growing understanding of how fragile life truly was, and how easily it could be guided toward death without violence, without noise, without scandal. They did not speak of murder openly, not yet, but Paris had taught them both the same lesson, in different ways. That justice was selective, that morality was negotiable, and that those who appeared untouchable were often the least protected of all, provided one knew where to strike. For Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray, the education was complete. The question was no longer whether she could endure her circumstances. It was how far she was willing to go to change them. When Gaudin de Sainte Croix returned from the Bastille, he carried no visible scars. That, in itself, was deceptive. Paris saw a man restored to freedom. Marie-Madeleine saw someone altered at the core. The prison had stripped Sainte Croix of illusions, replacing them with knowledge, dangerous, precise knowledge that did not announce itself loudly, but waited for opportunity. They resumed their relationship carefully, not recklessly, as before, but deliberately. They met in controlled spaces. They spoke in fragments. They understood that Antoine Dreux-Dobray's reach extended far beyond his household. To survive. Discretion was no longer a courtesy. It was necessity. Sainte Croix spoke of what he had learned only gradually. At first, it was framed as curiosity. Stories of men in the Bastille accused of poisoning rivals, spouses, benefactors, tales of substances that left no trace once ingested, of physicians baffled by symptoms they could not explain, forced to declare deaths natural out of ignorance rather than certainty. In 17th century France, medicine was guesswork dressed in ritual. Illness was explained through imbalances of humors, divine punishment, or simple bad fortune. Autopsies were rare. Chemical analysis did not exist. If a body failed quietly, no one asked why. Marie-Madeleine understood immediately what this meant. Death did not need to look like murder. It could look like weakness, like age, like God's will. The idea settled into her mind with frightening ease. There are moments when a person recognizes a door they were always meant to open. Marie-Madeleine did not recoil from this knowledge. She absorbed it, examined it, tested its weight against her reality. Her father was aging. Her husband was bankrupt. Her brothers stood between her and wealth she would never legally touch, and Paris would not question deaths that arrived politely. She did not act immediately. That would have been careless. Instead, she observed. She listened. She asked questions that sounded theoretical, detached. Saint Croix, cautious at first, soon realized that she was not merely indulging morbid curiosity. She was planning. There are persistent rumors, never fully proven, never entirely dismissed, that during this period Marie Madeleine began to experiment. Some claimed she visited hospitals, observing the dying, noting symptoms, timing, reactions. Others whispered that servants fell ill unexpectedly, that sudden fevers passed without explanation. The truth remains obscured by time. What is certain is this: when Marie Madeleine finally chose to act, she did so with precision that suggested preparation. Poison, when administered incorrectly, was messy. It caused violent symptoms. It invited suspicion. But when handled carefully, diluted, measured, disguised, it mimicked nature itself. Arsenic, in particular, was versatile. It weakened slowly. It confused physicians. It left victims bedridden long before death arrived. Saint Croix provided access. Marie Madeleine provided opportunity. And opportunity, in her world, was abundant. She was still a welcome guest in her father's household, the obedient daughter, the dutiful visitor. Antoine Dreux d'Aubray trusted her. Why wouldn't he? She had never challenged him openly, never embarrassed him publicly, never given reason for doubt. Trust, Marie Madeleine learned, was the most lethal ingredient of all. In 1666, she began. The doses were small at first, mixed into food, dissolved into drink. Symptoms appeared gradually: fatigue, weakness, stomach pains. Physicians were summoned. They murmured about age, digestion, imbalance. No one suspected a crime. Marie Madeleine watched carefully. She adjusted. By the time Antoine Dreux d'Aubray died on September 10, 1666, his passing felt inevitable rather than sudden. No autopsy was performed. No investigation pursued. A powerful man had died quietly in his bed. Paris accepted it without protest. Marie Madeleine attended the funeral as a grieving daughter. She wept convincingly. She was praised for her devotion. Inwardly, she felt something far more unsettling than relief. She felt clarity. Her father's death did not bring the outcome she expected. The estate passed, as law dictated, to her brothers. Antoine and François d'Aubray were young, healthy, and very much alive. Marie Madeleine did not panic. Panic was for those without options. She simply reassessed. If poison could remove one obstacle, it could remove others. This time, however, access would be more complicated. Her brothers were not infirm. They did not welcome her attentions with the same unguarded trust. They were cautious, aware of inheritance, aware of advantage. Marie Madeleine adapted. She recruited help. Jean Hamelin, known as La Chaussée, was employed in the household. Loyal, observant, and ultimately expendable. He could move where she could not, handle food, serve drink, wait patiently for opportunity. The plan unfolded over years, not weeks. In June 1670, Antoine d'Aubray fell ill and died. In September, François followed. 2 brothers, 2 deaths, close enough to raise whispers, distant enough to avoid certainty. Authorities investigated more thoroughly than they had in 1666. Physicians examined bodies. Officials asked questions, but evidence was thin, suspicion diffuse. No direct link to Marie Madeleine emerged, once again. Paris chose comfort over truth. Marie Madeleine inherited wealth at last. She had succeeded, or so it seemed, because poison, like ambition, has a way of leaving traces, even when the body does not. And the most dangerous evidence was not buried with the dead. It was locked inside a chest. In the apartments of the one man who knew everything, Gaudin de Sainte-Croix. Gaudin de Sainte-Croix did not die like the others. There was no slow decline, no careful dosing, no time for adjustment. His death, when it came in 1672, was abrupt, violent enough to raise questions, yet ambiguous enough to defy certainty. Some said illness, others whispered accident, a few speculated, quietly, that a man who lived among poisons might eventually fall victim to his own expertise. What mattered was not how he died. It was what he left behind. Sainte Croix had been careless in a way Marie Madeleine never was. He trusted too much in secrecy, too much in their shared silence, in his apartments, hidden but not well enough. Authorities discovered a chest. Inside it, Paris found what it feared most: bottles of powders and liquids, carefully sealed, labels written in code, notes detailing effects, dosages, timing, and letters, correspondence between Sainte Croix and Marie Madeleine that did not confess outright, but hinted with devastating clarity. It was enough. The Paris police reopened the cases they had been content to forget. Antoine Dreux d'Aubray, Antoine d'Aubray the Younger, François d'Aubray. 3 deaths, 1 beneficiary. Marie Madeleine understood the danger immediately. She fled Paris before warrants could be issued. Her departure was quiet, efficient. She abandoned comforts, contacts, reputation. The city that had protected her through silence now turned against her with equal discretion. Flight, however, does not erase memory. In 1673, Jean Amelin, La Chaussée, was arrested. Under questioning, he resisted. Under torture, he collapsed. His confession was thorough, precise, unforgiving. He named Marie Madeleine without hesitation, detailing his role in administering poison. His instructions, the payments, the machinery of justice, once set in motion, moved swiftly and mercilessly. La Chaussée was executed on March 24, 1673. Marie Madeleine was condemned in absentia. For 3 years, she lived as a fugitive. She crossed borders but never truly escaped. England, the Spanish Netherlands, always close, always cautious. The fear of capture followed her like a shadow she could not outrun. In 1676, in the city of Liège, it caught her. She was extradited to France in chains. The trial that followed was not about truth. It was about reassurance. Paris needed a monster. The crown needed to prove control. The public needed a face to attach to its fear. Marie Madeleine refused to cooperate. She denied everything. Witnesses spoke. Letters were read. Evidence accumulated. Still, she remained silent, composed, distant. The court responded as it always did when silence threatened authority. They ordered torture. The water cure was chosen, an instrument designed not merely to extract confession, but to destroy resistance. For hours, water was forced into her body until breath failed, until pain eclipsed dignity. On July 16, 1676, she confessed. It changed nothing. That same day, at the Place de Grève, Marie Madeleine d'Aubray, Marquise de Brinvilliers, was executed by beheading. Her body was burned, her ashes scattered. Paris believed the story was over. It was wrong. Her crimes ignited something far larger, a wave of paranoia that would become known as the affair of the poisons. Aristocrats accused one another, fortune-tellers, alchemists. Servants were arrested. Dozens were executed. Hundreds suspected. For years, Paris lived in fear of invisible death. All because one woman learned what her city had been teaching all along. That power is not seized with force, it is taken quietly, and sometimes it is dissolved, silently, into wine. Paris had seen scandals before. It had endured assassinations, conspiracies, and public executions staged like theater. But poison was different. Poison did not announce itself. It did not respect rank, walls, or lineage, and once fear took root, it spread faster than any disease. After the discovery of St. Croix's chest, the city changed its posture almost overnight. Conversations lowered in volume. Servants were watched more closely. Meals, once occasions of indulgence, became moments of suspicion. Cups were examined, plates exchanged. Trust eroded at the dinner table. The reopening of the Daubrey deaths was only the beginning. Investigators retraced steps that should have been examined years earlier. Physicians were questioned about symptoms they had dismissed too easily. Servants were summoned and interrogated about meals long since forgotten. Every coincidence that had once felt convenient now appeared sinister. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray became the center of gravity. Her role as beneficiary could no longer be ignored. Her connection to St. Croix, once whispered and dismissed, now carried lethal weight. Letters were dissected for implication, phrases reread with new intent. Silence itself became evidence. And yet, for a brief moment, it still seemed possible she might escape justice. Paris was accustomed to protecting its own, especially those with noble titles. Had Marie-Madeleine remained, had she trusted in the system she had manipulated so well, history might have unfolded differently. But she ran. Flight transformed suspicion into certainty. Her disappearance confirmed what evidence alone could not. Innocent people did not abandon their lives so completely, so efficiently, in fleeing Paris. Marie-Madeleine admitted guilt in the only language the city truly believed. Behind her, the machinery accelerated. Jean Hamelin's arrest broke the last barrier. La Chaussée was not noble. He had no protection, no reputation worth preserving. Under pressure, he tried to remain loyal, under pain. Loyalty dissolved. His confession stripped the crimes of ambiguity. He described the instructions he received, the timing, the methods, the money, the fear. He named names without hesitation. Marie-Madeleine was no longer a shadow behind events. She was the architect. Paris reacted with horror and fascination. Pamphlets circulated. Gossip exploded. The idea that a noble woman, a mother, a respected figure, could poison her own family unsettled the foundations of social order. If virtue could be faked so perfectly, what did that say about everyone else? The authorities moved quickly to reassure the public. La Chaussée was tortured and executed. His death served as proof that justice still functioned. Marie-Madeleine was tried in absentia, condemned, and publicly named as a monster. But the fear did not subside. It multiplied. If one woman could do this undetected for years, how many others were already doing the same? How many deaths labeled natural were nothing of the sort? How many households were already compromised? Louis XIV understood the danger immediately. Poison threatened not just lives, but hierarchy. It made power vulnerable. It turned servants into potential executioners, wives into suspects, heirs into targets. The very structure of aristocratic security was at risk. Investigations expanded beyond Marie-Madeleine. Fortune tellers, apothecaries, alchemists, anyone rumored to possess forbidden knowledge, were questioned, arrested, watched. The net widened indiscriminately. Evidence mattered less than reassurance. Accusation alone became enough to destroy a life. This period would come to be known as the Affair of the Poisons, and at its dark center stood the memory of one woman. Meanwhile, Marie Madeleine lived as a fugitive. Exile stripped her of everything she had once valued. Titles meant nothing across borders. Wealth dwindled, protection vanished. She survived by caution alone, moving quietly, trusting no one fully, always listening for footsteps behind her. She did not confess in hiding. She did not repent. Those who encountered her later described a woman diminished physically, but unchanged in spirit, controlled, reserved, unapologetic. Whatever fear she felt, she did not display it. In Liège, in 1676, her luck ended. She was recognized, arrested, extradited. Paris reclaimed its monster. Chains replaced discretion. Crowds replaced silence. The woman who had once moved invisibly through the city was now paraded as proof that order would be restored. But Paris would soon learn that executing Marie Madeleine d'Aubray would not restore what had been lost. Because fear, once introduced, does not disappear with the blade, and poison, once understood, can never be forgotten. By the time Marie Madeleine d'Aubray was brought back to Paris, the city no longer wanted answers. It wanted certainty. Her return was staged not as a legal necessity, but as a public ritual. Chains were displayed deliberately. Guards escorted her through streets where whispers followed like wind through stone corridors. People leaned from windows, searching her face for signs of evil, some deformity, some visible corruption that might reassure them this woman was not like them. They found none. Marie Madeleine appeared calm, thinner, yes, weaker in body. But her posture was controlled, her expression unreadable. If she felt fear, she concealed it with the same discipline that had defined her entire life. That composure disturbed Paris more than any confession could have. The trial that followed was less an examination of facts than a performance of authority. The verdict had already been decided. The purpose of proceedings was not to determine guilt, but to demonstrate that the state still held power over chaos. Witnesses were summoned, letters read aloud. Sainte Croix's chest was displayed as if it were a holy relic of corruption. Physicians testified about symptoms they had once dismissed. La Chaussee's confession, extracted through pain, was treated as unquestionable truth. Marie Madeleine denied everything. Her refusal unsettled the court. Confession was expected. Repentance was demanded. Instead, she offered silence and contradiction. She challenged testimony where she could. She dismissed rumors as speculation. She refused to perform guilt for the authorities. This was intolerable. In 17th century France, torture was not seen as cruelty. It was procedure, a tool to extract truth when words failed. And so, when persuasion and pressure proved insufficient, the court ordered what it always did when faced with resistance: the question extraordinaire, the water cure. The method was brutal in its simplicity. Her mouth was forced open with wedges. Water was poured relentlessly into her body, swelling her stomach, stealing breath, blurring consciousness. Pain overwhelmed dignity. Survival became instinct. For 4 hours, the state asserted its dominance over her body. When she confessed, it was not revelation. It was surrender. Marie Madeleine admitted to poisoning her father and brothers. She confirmed what Paris already believed. The confession satisfied the court not because it clarified truth, but because it restored hierarchy. Authority had broken resistance. Order, at least symbolically, was re-established. On July 16, 1676, she was taken to the Place de Grève. Public executions were familiar spectacles, but this one carried particular weight. Crowds gathered not merely to witness death, but to reassure themselves. The blade would separate danger from safety. Her blood would cleanse their fear. She was beheaded with a sword. Her body was burned, ashes scattered. Paris exhaled, but relief was short-lived. Because Marie Madeleine's execution did not end the affair of the poisons, it intensified it. Her confession confirmed the unimaginable. That invisible murder was not theoretical. It was practiced. It worked, and it had gone undetected for years. If she could do it, others could too. Investigations expanded aggressively. Accusations multiplied. Entire networks were imagined into existence. Fortune-tellers were accused of supplying poisons, midwives suspected, servants arrested, noblewomen interrogated behind closed doors. Some were guilty. Many were not. 36 people were executed. Dozens more imprisoned or exiled. Hundreds lived under suspicion. The court of Louis XIV constructed a special tribunal to manage the flood of fear, a machine designed to process paranoia into punishment. Poison had accomplished what swords never could. It made power nervous. Long after Marie Madeleine's ashes had vanished, her presence lingered. Writers, historians, and moralists would argue over her motives for centuries. Was she driven by greed? By resentment? By love? By ambition denied too long? The truth was less dramatic and more disturbing. She was not a monster born different. She was a woman shaped by a city that taught her silence over justice, appearance over truth, and control over compassion. Paris had shown her that power belonged to those who understood how systems could be exploited without being seen. She simply listened. And in doing so, she exposed something Paris could never fully confront: that the most dangerous crimes are not committed in darkness. They are committed in plain sight, protected by trust, enabled by custom, and ignored because acknowledging them would mean questioning everything else. Marie Madeleine d'Aubray died as a warning, but Paris learned the wrong lesson. It feared poison, not the society that made it possible. Paris told itself the nightmare was over. The blade had fallen. The fire had consumed the body. The name Madame de Brinvilliers had been reduced to ash and rumor. For a brief moment, the city allowed itself to believe that order had been restored, that evil had been isolated, punished, erased. Public executions were meant to do that. They transformed anxiety into spectacle, uncertainty into closure. But poison does not end when the hand that poured it is destroyed. It lingers in kitchens, in medicine cabinets, in the imagination. After Marie Madeleine's execution, deaths continued to be questioned, illnesses reinterpreted. Families re-examined their histories with new suspicion. Servants noticed how closely they were watched. Wives noticed how carefully they were observed. Inheritance disputes took on a sharper edge. Trust had been permanently damaged. The affair of the poisons did not explode because of Marie Madeleine alone. She was not the cause. She was the proof. Proof that murder could exist beneath manners, that the aristocracy, so eager to present itself as moral, was vulnerable to the same corruption it condemned in others. Louis XIV's court responded with force. Special tribunals expanded their reach. Informants were encouraged. Accusations rewarded. Entire social circles were destabilized overnight. Fortune-tellers were dragged from their homes. Apothecaries interrogated. Even high-ranking nobles found themselves under suspicion. One of them, Olympia Mancini, Countess of Soissons, was accused of involvement in poisoning plots and forced into exile. Others vanished into prisons or obscurity, their reputations ruined regardless of guilt. Justice became secondary. Control was the priority. In total, 36 people were executed, 23 were exiled. Hundreds more were investigated, questioned, or quietly monitored. The affair officially ended in 1682, not because truth had been uncovered, but because the king ordered silence. Some records were sealed, some testimonies destroyed, some questions left deliberately unanswered. Paris moved on. It always did. But Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray did not disappear from memory. She lingered in stories told in low voices, in cautionary tales whispered at dinner tables, in literature that tried and failed to categorize her neatly. Was she a monster? A victim? A product of ambition denied? Writers like Alexander Dumas and Arthur Conan Doyle would later transform her into symbol and spectacle, shaping her life into something dramatic, distant, almost fictional. But the truth was far less comforting. She was ordinary in the most unsettling way. She did not kill in passion or madness. She killed methodically, patiently, using the tools her society placed in her hands: trust, proximity, silence, and the assumption that women, especially noble women, were incapable of such calculated violence. Paris had taught her that. The same city that condemned her had rewarded her obedience, ignored her suffering, and protected her crimes until they became impossible to deny. It had taught her that power was not moral, it was practical, that consequences applied unevenly, that the appearance of virtue mattered more than virtue itself. Poison was merely the instrument. The real danger was the system that made it effective. In the end, Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray did not destroy Paris. She revealed it. She showed how easily civility could be weaponized, how justice could be delayed by status, how death could pass unnoticed if it arrived politely enough, and how a society obsessed with appearances could be undone by something it refused to see. The city learned to fear poison. It never learned to fear itself. And that is why her story still matters. Because long after the arsenic dissolved, long after the executions ended, one truth remained unchanged. The most terrifying crimes are not the ones committed in darkness. They are the ones that happen quietly, with permission, with politeness, and with everyone looking the other way. History prefers clean endings. A name condemned, a body destroyed, a lesson neatly contained. That is how Paris chose to remember Madame de Brinvilliers. As an exception, an aberration, a singular corruption that could be excised without consequence. Once she was dead. The city convinced itself that the danger had been neutralized, that order had been restored by fire and steel. But silence after violence is never empty. It is crowded with what people refuse to confront. In the years following the affair of the poisons, France rebuilt its confidence carefully. Official records were closed. Certain testimonies disappeared. The Crown discouraged further inquiry, not because the threat was gone, but because prolonged fear weakened authority. Too much truth destabilized the hierarchy that Louis XIV worked obsessively to preserve. So the story was simplified. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray became the poisoner. Others became footnotes. The system itself remained unnamed. What survived was myth. She was described as unnatural, depraved, possessed by greed or lust or madness, anything that would separate her from ordinary people. Anything that would allow society to believe, this could never be us. Yet the uncomfortable reality lingered beneath the narrative. Marie-Madeleine did not invent poison. She did not invent corruption. She did not invent silence. She merely understood how they worked together. She understood that in a world governed by appearances, invisibility was power, that trust was exploitable, that women, especially obedient, aristocratic women, were underestimated to the point of immunity. She understood that medicine lacked certainty, law bowed to influence, and morality yielded to convenience. Those conditions did not vanish with her execution. They rarely do. centuries later. Her story still unsettles not because of what she did, but because of how easily she did it. No extraordinary strength, no public violence, no rebellion, just patience, proximity, and the willingness to cross a line no one believed she would approach. That is what makes her frightening. Not her cruelty, but her normalcy. Every society produces its Brinvilliers. Not always poisoners, not always murderers, but individuals who learn the rules well enough to break them invisibly, who exploit trust instead of challenging power directly, who commit harm that looks from the outside like coincidence or misfortune. History remembers the poison. It forgets the permission. Paris wanted a monster, so it would not have to see itself. It wanted a woman it could condemn absolutely, so it would not have to examine the structures that rewarded silence, punished resistance, and protected those who knew how to operate quietly. And so the city moved on. The stones of Paris remain. The tables are still set. The wine still poured. But beneath every civilized surface lies the same unsettling truth Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray revealed nearly 4 centuries ago. Evil does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes, it waits to be invited in. If Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray's story had ended with her execution, it would have been a tragedy. What followed turned it into a warning. In the wake of the affair of the poisons, France did not become safer. It became watchful, and there is a difference between vigilance and fear. The crown tightened control over apothecaries and medical practice, but knowledge did not disappear. It adapted. Recipes were hidden behind euphemism. Ingredients were renamed. Trust shifted from open counters to whispered networks. The same substances remained available, only now wrapped in greater secrecy. Poison did not retreat. It went underground. At court, etiquette hardened into surveillance. Servants were vetted obsessively. Food was tasted, then retasted. Cups were switched mid-meal to signal suspicion without accusation. Even intimacy became strategic. To be close was to be dangerous. Louis XIV understood that fear could be governed, but only if it was directed. So the narrative was reinforced. The poisoner was an aberration. The state was the cure. Trials emphasized spectacle over nuance. Records emphasized guilt over context. Complexity was a liability in this environment. Denunciation became currency. People accused rivals to protect themselves. Old grudges found new language. A whispered suggestion could destroy a household. The tribunals processed claims quickly, unevenly, and often unjustly. Yet each verdict reassured the public that something was being done. Justice, once again, was less important than order. The paradox was cruel. The more the state pursued poison, the more it normalized the idea that unseen death was everywhere. Anxiety spread faster than any decree could contain it, and the lesson absorbed by the observant was not moral restraint, but operational refinement. If Marie-Madeleine had shown how poison could work, the aftermath showed how power could misuse fear. Across Europe, her name traveled, not just as legend, but as method. Pamphlets translated, rumors adapted. Courts whispered warnings to one another. In some places, regulation tightened. In others, indifference prevailed. Everywhere, the same question hovered, unanswered. How many deaths had already passed unnoticed? Medicine struggled to catch up, without chemical science. Physicians remained reliant on symptom narratives and social context. A poor man's death was suspicious. A noble's was dignified. Bias disguised itself as expertise, and in that gap, certainty died quietly. Writers returned to her story again and again, trying to shape it into something useful. Moralists framed her as a cautionary tale about female ambition. Novelists dramatized her as a temptress or a fiend. Detectives in fiction tried to solve what history had already condemned. But each retelling avoided the same discomfort. They focused on her, not on why she succeeded, because to confront that would mean admitting that the safeguards were never designed to protect everyone, only to preserve hierarchy. That silence was rewarded. That obedience was mistaken for virtue. That trust was extended selectively and withdrawn strategically. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray did not break the system. She navigated it. And that is why, centuries later, her story still resists closure, not because arsenic is frightening, but because permission is. Permission to ignore what is inconvenient. Permission to believe appearances. Permission to mistake calm for innocence and politeness for safety. The affair of the poisons officially ended in 1682. Its lessons did not. Every era has its poisons, some chemical, some institutional. They move through familiar channels, trust, access, routine. They thrive where scrutiny is uneven and accountability negotiable. Marie-Madeleine's legacy is not the method, it is the mirror. She forces us to ask the question Paris never fully answered. When harm occurs quietly, and everyone benefits from not noticing, who is truly responsible? History prefers villains, but reality prefers systems. And systems, once learned, are far harder to execute than any single person. Long after the courts fell silent and the tribunals were dissolved, Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray refused to stay buried. Not physically, her ashes were scattered and gone, but conceptually. She reappeared whenever society needed a warning it could safely misunderstand. Each generation reshaped her into something useful. A cautionary tale, a moral failure, a scandal with sharp edges dulled by time. History tried to trap her inside labels, poisoner, monster, exception, but none of them held. What made Marie-Madeleine unsettling was not the scale of her crimes. Others killed more, louder, with greater cruelty, but the way she fit so neatly into the world around her. She did not rebel against social order. She exploited it. She did not reject femininity. She weaponized its assumptions. She did not challenge power publicly. She learned how to move beneath it. That subtlety made her impossible to neutralize. In the centuries that followed, scholars argued over motive as if motive alone could contain consequence. Greed, they said, or resentment, or forbidden love, or psychological defect. Each explanation narrowed the story until it felt manageable. But none of those explanations accounted for the ease. Ease is the detail history avoids. It was easy for her to access her father's table, easy for her to serve wine, easy for physicians to misdiagnose, easy for officials to accept inheritance without questions, easy for society to believe what comforted it most. Marie-Madeleine did not force the door open. She walked through one already ajar. That is why her story survives beyond archives and trials. It resonates not as spectacle, but as pattern. Wherever systems reward appearance over accountability, wherever silence protects privilege, wherever proximity is mistaken for innocence, the conditions she exploited quietly reassemble. Modern readers search her face for madness. They search her childhood for trauma. They search her letters for confession. What they find instead is discipline. She waited. She planned. She adapted. Those are not monstrous traits. They are human ones, often celebrated in different contexts. And that is the uncomfortable truth her story insists upon. The qualities that enable harm are often the same ones that enable success. Paris tried to end her influence with fire. It failed, because the real legacy of Madame de Brinvilliers is not arsenic or scandal. It is the reminder that systems do not collapse when they are violated quietly. They continue, unchanged, while blame concentrates on a single figure who makes everyone else feel absolved. History prefers singular villains because they allow collective innocence. But Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray does not grant that comfort. She stands still, as evidence that the most effective crimes do not announce themselves as crimes at all. They look like routine. They sound like politeness. They wear the mask of trust until trust itself becomes the weapon. And that is why, centuries later, her story still unsettles, not because she poisoned, but because so many people made it possible and called it normal. There is a particular discomfort that arises when history refuses to give us distance. Some figures are safely remote. Tyrants, warlords, monsters whose violence is so overt it creates a clear boundary between them and us. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray offers no such comfort. She lived inside familiar structures. She followed expected paths. She fulfilled her roles convincingly. That familiarity is what makes her enduringly unsettling. She did not lurk in shadows. She sat at family tables. She attended church. She raised children. She navigated salons and social obligations with the ease expected of her class. Nothing about her daily life suggested rupture. Nothing about her demeanor invited alarm. If anything, she embodied stability, and that is precisely the problem. Evil, when it is effective, rarely announces itself as such. It adapts to its environment. It learns the rules and uses them more faithfully than anyone else. Marie-Madeleine understood the rhythms of her world, the deference expected of women, the blind spots of male authority, the assumptions woven into class and gender. She did not violate those assumptions. She relied on them. That reliance exposed a flaw far larger than her own crimes. It revealed how deeply society depended on unexamined trust, how reputation substituted for scrutiny, how obedience was mistaken for virtue. Paris had created a system that rewarded quiet compliance and punished visible resistance. Marie-Madeleine chose compliance and used it to devastating effect. She showed that conformity, when paired with intent, could be more dangerous than rebellion. This is why her story keeps returning. Not because poison fascinates us, but because proximity does. The idea that harm can come from those closest to us, that familiarity itself can be weaponized, challenges the narratives we depend on to feel safe. We want danger to look foreign, disruptive, loud. She made it look domestic. Historians often ask whether Marie-Madeleine felt remorse. The question itself reveals a longing for moral resolution. If she regretted her actions, perhaps we can contain them within personal failure. If she was tormented, perhaps the story ends in balance, but remorse is irrelevant to impact. Whether she justified herself or condemned herself internally does not change what her story reveals. That systems can enable extraordinary harm without ever appearing broken. That institutions designed to maintain order can be repurposed quietly, efficiently, and for years, without detection. She did not exploit chaos. She exploited order. That distinction matters, because chaos invites reform. Order invites complacency. When things appear to function, scrutiny relaxes. When routines hold, questions fade. Marie-Madeleine understood that stability was camouflage. She lived inside that camouflage until it became lethal. And when the truth finally surfaced, society responded not by interrogating the camouflage, but by burning the figure who wore it. That response was emotionally satisfying, but structurally meaningless. It punished outcome, not condition. The conditions remained. That is why her legacy persists beyond history books. It surfaces in modern true crime narratives, in scandals that reveal abuse hidden behind respectability, in institutions shocked to discover harm perpetrated by those deemed safe. Every time a system reacts with disbelief, how could this happen here? The echo of Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray is present, because the answer is always the same. It happened here because here felt safe. Her story is not about poison. It is about permission. Permission to trust without verifying. Permission to prioritize appearance over accountability. Permission to believe that conformity equals innocence. Paris learned to fear arsenic. It never learned to fear familiarity. And that, more than any vial or powder, is the poison that never expires. Societies do not simply punish crimes. They arrange meaning around them. When Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray was executed, Paris did not only eliminate a threat, it resolved a narrative problem. Her death allowed the city to compress years of anxiety, contradiction, and moral failure into a single figure. Blame became concentrated, responsibility simplified. This is the quiet function of scapegoats. By naming her the poisoner, Paris absolved itself. The courts could claim vigilance. The crown could claim control. Families could return to their tables believing danger had been removed rather than merely displaced. The comfort was profound, because if evil could be reduced to one woman, one extraordinary deviation, then the rest of society could remain ordinary, intact, unexamined. That logic shaped everything that followed. Records emphasized her agency while minimizing complicity. Servants became tools, not participants. Physicians became ignorant, not negligent. Officials became deceived, not willfully blind. Each role was sanitized, its responsibility softened by distance from intent. Marie-Madeleine absorbed it all. She became the vessel for collective guilt. This pattern repeats relentlessly across history. When harm emerges from within a system, the system protects itself by isolating the offender as an exception. The narrative shifts from, "How did this happen?" to, "How do we ensure this never happens again?" without ever examining whether the mechanisms that enabled it remain untouched. In Paris, they did. The same inheritance laws persisted. The same gender constraints endured. The same medical ignorance prevailed. The same deference to status remained unquestioned. Only the name changed. Marie-Madeleine's story exposes a truth that institutions resist acknowledging, that harm is rarely enabled by ignorance alone. More often, it is enabled by incentives. Silence rewarded, compliance praised, disruption punished. She did not succeed because no one knew better. She succeeded because knowing better was inconvenient. Physicians could have questioned symptoms more aggressively, but that would have implied uncertainty. Officials could have investigated deaths more thoroughly, but that would have delayed closure. Families could have pushed for answers, but that would have risked scandal. Every choice to look away was rationalized. Together, they formed permission. This is why Marie-Madeleine remains unsettling, even when stripped of drama. Her actions reveal not just individual cruelty, but collective accommodation. A series of small decisions, each understandable in isolation, that aligned to produce irreversible harm. No single person intended the outcome. That is the most dangerous configuration of all. Modern audiences often search for warning signs, personality traits, psychological markers, moments that might have revealed her intentions earlier. The search is comforting because it suggests prevention is simply a matter of recognition. But recognition was never the problem. People saw what they wanted to see because seeing otherwise would have required change, and change threatens stability far more than denial ever does. Paris preferred a monster to a mirror. So Marie-Madeleine became mythologized, her image sharpened, her motives exaggerated, her humanity eroded. The more monstrous she appeared, the safer everyone else felt. But monsters are easy to defeat. Systems are not. That is why her story does not resolve cleanly. It resists moral containment. It lingers not as a closed case, but as an unresolved question, one that history keeps asking in different forms. When harm is enabled by routine, when silence is rewarded, when power flows unevenly, who truly carries the blame? Paris answered by pointing to one woman. History, less forgiving, continues to point back. Time has a way of sanding down scandal. What once shocked becomes anecdote. What once terrified becomes reference. Names that carried weight dissolve into footnotes, then into curiosities for historians and storytellers searching for drama in the past. And yet, some stories refuse erosion. Madame de Brinvilliers survives not because her crimes were unique, but because the conditions that enabled them never truly disappeared. They only changed costume. After the affair of the poisons officially closed in 1682, France did what all societies do after a period of panic. It normalized again. Tables were set. Trust was tentatively restored. The rituals of civility resumed their protective function. People needed to believe that the danger had been extraordinary, temporary, resolved. The alternative was unbearable. To admit that the threat had been structural, that it had lived quietly within accepted norms, would have required rethinking everything from law to family to authority. That kind of reckoning rarely follows fear. Fear prefers closure, not transformation. So the lesson was misfiled. Poison became the villain, not access, not power, not silence. Centuries later, when historians revisit Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray, they often approach her story with analytical distance. They measure sources. They debate reliability. They contextualize her actions within her era's legal and medical limitations. All of that is necessary, but distance can also become insulation. What remains uncomfortable is how modern her story still feels. She did not rely on superstition or chaos. She relied on routine, on assumptions that remain familiar. That family is safe. That status signals trustworthiness. That politeness equals harmlessness. That institutions work unless proven otherwise. Those assumptions still circulate. Modern societies possess forensic science, surveillance, regulation, tools 17th century Paris could not imagine. And yet, harm continues to emerge from familiar places, perpetrated by individuals whose greatest advantage is not secrecy, but credibility. Marie-Madeleine would recognize this immediately. She would understand how authority still deflects scrutiny, how systems still prioritize stability over disruption, how people still hesitate to question what feels normal because normal feels necessary. Her story persists because it does not belong exclusively to the past. It maps too cleanly onto patterns that repeat whenever comfort outweighs accountability. We ask, how did no one see this coming? But the answer is always the same. They did. They just chose not to look. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of incentive. Looking too closely risks embarrassment, delay, conflict, loss of control. Silence, by contrast, preserves rhythm, and rhythm, especially in hierarchical systems, feels like order. Marie-Madeleine moved within that rhythm flawlessly. When her story resurfaces in modern retellings, it is often framed as a psychological puzzle. What kind of woman could do this? What darkness must she have carried? But that framing misses the point. The more important question is not who she was, but where she lived, not geographically, but structurally. She lived inside a system that rewarded restraint, punished confrontation, and confused calm with goodness. She did not rupture that system. She used it, and when she was finally exposed, The system did what systems do best. It isolated the breach, repaired the surface, and continued operating as before. That continuity is the real legacy. Because the most enduring crimes are not those that shock us once, but those that teach us nothing, those that are remembered as aberrations instead of warnings, those that reassure us that evil is rare, rather than reminding us that harm often looks exactly like normal life, until it doesn't. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray did not leave behind a method. She left behind a question, one that history keeps asking, and societies keep answering incorrectly. If this could happen here, and it looks so ordinary, what else are we choosing not to see? Every story ends. Every lesson claims closure. History, however, rarely resolves the questions it raises. Madame de Brinvilliers has been dead for centuries. Yet the unease she provoked has never fully settled. Not because her crimes were especially elaborate, but because they refused to stay contained in the past. They continue to surface wherever societies rely too heavily on trust without scrutiny, order without accountability, and appearance without verification. Paris wanted her story to end at the scaffold. It did not. What truly survived her execution was not fear of poison, but the exposure of a deeper vulnerability, that the systems designed to protect people often prioritize comfort over truth, that they depend on assumptions about family, class, gender, authority, that feel natural until they are exploited. Marie-Madeleine did not dismantle those assumptions. She revealed them. She showed how easily harm could move through the most trusted channels, how violence could wear the disguise of routine, how death could arrive politely, without resistance, because no one wanted to believe it had been invited. The most unsettling part of her story is not what she did at the table. It is how many people sat there with her and never questioned why. Modern audiences often search for final judgment. Was she evil? Was she shaped by circumstance? Was she an anomaly or an inevitability? These questions feel important because they promise moral clarity. But clarity is not the lesson. The lesson is discomfort. Discomfort with the realization that prevention is not only about identifying dangerous individuals, but about examining the structures that allow danger to pass unnoticed. That the most reliable warning signs are often ignored because acknowledging them would require disruption of routines, reputations, hierarchies. Marie-Madeleine understood that disruption was costly. Silence was cheap. So she chose silence, and silence protected her, until it didn't. When her crimes finally emerged, Paris responded the only way it knew how, by isolating her as the problem. The execution reassured the public. The tribunals reassured the crown. Order, at least symbolically, was restored. But symbols do not correct incentives. And incentives shape behavior far more reliably than fear ever will. That is why her story persists, not as a warning about poison, but as a warning about complacency, about the ease with which systems normalize small acts of avoidance until those acts align into catastrophe, about how harm thrives not in chaos, but in predictability. If there is a final reckoning in the story of Madame de Brinvilliers, it is not hers, it is ours, because every generation inherits structures built by the last, and every generation must decide whether it will interrogate those structures or rely on them unquestioningly until they fail. Paris chose reassurance over reflection. History recorded the result. And that leaves us with the only question that truly matters. The one that no execution, no verdict, no closing chapter can eliminate when harm looks ordinary, when it moves quietly through trusted spaces, when everyone benefits from not noticing. What will we choose to see? That question is the poison that never dissipates.